Welcome back to the Weekend Primetime. We start this hour with the Trump administration's increasingly cruel tactics in their immigration crackdown, turning Halloween into a night of very real terror. The New York Times reports, quote, federal immigration agents fanned out across Chicago and its North Shore suburbs on Halloween, chasing suspects through front yards, driving SUVs onto sidewalks, and using chemical agents during confrontations with furious residents. The Times goes on, quote, several people, including at least one woman who said that she was a U.S. citizen, were arrested after appearing to interfere with immigration operations. This all comes just days after ICE agents deployed tear gas in a Chicago neighborhood, minutes before the start of an annual Halloween parade. Illinois Governor Pritzker slammed DHS, demanding it pause immigration arrests until after Halloween. Secretary Kristi Noem declined. Chicago wasn't alone in dealing with all of Trump's cruel immigration crackdown actions this week. An independent Los Angeles media outlet reported seeing people wearing Halloween masks in the same area where DHS has been staging since immigration raids got started. The outlet, the LA Taco, requested comment from the DHS on the use of Halloween masks by these federal agents. The response they got, happy Halloween. Joining us now is Veronica Cardenas, former ICE Assistant Chief Counsel. She also leads Humanigration, an organization that educates immigration lawyers about the rights of non-citizens. Veronica, it's great to have you back here on the show. In your view, as you've watched not just what we've seen over the last 24 hours, but over the last several weeks, this ramp up, these aggressive blitzes, Chicago and elsewhere, do you believe at this stage we're looking at something that is cruelty being the point?
Yes, absolutely. What we're seeing now, especially comments like Happy Halloween, to something that should be very disturbing. Officers, they're calling themselves law enforcement. They take oaths to uphold the law, and they're making fun. They're using this as just another tactic to really terrorize not only non-citizens, but Americans as well. This is no longer an immigration debate. This is really our democracy at a test.
Well, you served as an ICE prosecutor for a decade during the Obama years. And could you talk a bit about using tear gas that close to a children's parade? Would that have been an acceptable use of force? And what about the standard of just objective reasonableness of the proportionality of all of the force that they're coming in with around minors, around children?
Right, and that's a really good point, because this isn't something that we would see. This is an extraordinary circumstance right now. And what's complicating this more is that Customs and Border Protection, that's usually at the border or the ports of entry, that are given extraordinary authorities. They're allowed to do roving patrols. They're allowed to stop someone with no suspicion at all if they're suspecting that they're just crossing through the southern border or at the airport without proper documentation. They're bringing that style into our backyards, into our schools, our hospitals, our churches, and that is not acceptable.
Well, we've also seen a major leadership change in recent days where they've actually purposely pulled Border Patrol leaders into further leadership positions within DHS, sort of swapping people who are traditionally part of ICE with Border Patrol. And for people who aren't familiar, as you said, not only do they have a sort of different set of tactics and training along the border, not normally brought into the interior, but they also have a background of sometimes sort of questionable ethics and more aggression among that group that we've seen in other parts of the agency.
Exactly. And CBP, because they operate in desert lands, right? There's a lot of open space. There's not a lot of people. If they commit a violation against a non-citizen who's immediately deported back, there's not that accountability there. They're not raising their rights. But that type of style enforcement is not acceptable in the interior when there are non-citizens, there are Americans. We're a mixed status nation right now, and they're using the same level of tactics despite status.
You still have friends, yes, who are in the agency or you used to work in ICE. What is your sense of the morale there, how people who have been there for a long time feel about what's going on? I feel like one of the questions that comes up again and again is, how can the people who are there do these things. I understand that there are new recruits for whom the cruelty may be the point, who are attracted to the sort of aggressiveness that Trump has been promoting. But presumably there are civil servants who have been there for a long time who got into this work for very different reasons.
Right. And I think that there are many of us in that situation. I was one of them. That started in 2010. And I really did take the oath to uphold the Constitution. It wasn't about deporting. It was about enforcing the law and giving measured discretion to those who deserved it and to those bad criminals that did deserve to have ICE deport them, right? But that was played out in a court of law. And right now, it doesn't seem like there's that measured discretion. Assistant chief counsels are told what to do. They can't really say much in court proceedings except that they're opposing everything. The attorney general, who can actually rewrite law, they're given that authority. So if an immigration judge or the board, which is the appellate body, decides something, the attorney general could just take that decision and override it because it's the wrong one, because it doesn't favor deportation, and that's what they're doing. And so having the law stacked in that way, where trial attorneys are going to court, prosecutors are going to court, but their job is already done for them. These cases are already prejudged.
So why do people stay in these jobs, do you think?
They stay because they are, these are their careers. These are something that they've built up to do. And as a government servant myself, I could say that that decision is very difficult to make when your identity is tied to your job. There was a trajectory. I'm going to start as an assistant chief counsel. I might become a judge. I can move around in the government. The government is not that way anymore. But to wrap around and try to get another job, that does take time when people have families to support.
Is some of it also that I can imagine people wonder, well, if I leave this job, who's going to take my job?
I've wondered that too.
And when you look at some of the people that they are bringing in who seem to openly celebrate violence and aggression, you can imagine they'd say, well, it might help if I stay in this seat.
Well, now you're on the outside and you're advising clients seeking permanent status. You're an immigration lawyer. There have been horrifying stories about men and women who show up to their appointments with ICE and instead they're arrested. And they're trying to do the right thing and follow the rules. And that very impulse is what gets them stuck in a prison. What do you advise your clients these days? Do you tell them to show up for their appointments?
That is a very difficult position to be in, and it's one that I struggle with every day because I tell my clients we have to show up. There's no running from this because if we run, it'll just make everything worse. But when I tell them that the fact that they're being arrested as a check-in, that they're being arrested out of credible fear, which they should have never had because they've been in the U.S. for over 5 years, and they look at me and they're like, if this is illegal, why is this going to happen? How come you can't help me right now? And the reality is I can't help someone until ICE violates their due process and arrests them unlawfully. To challenge that, and that can take a month to 3 months to actually get them out. So it's a very difficult position.
Do you think the politics on this will change at all as we see, particularly in Chicago, these tactics go into incredibly wealthy neighborhoods? Demographics that I think maybe didn't imagine even during the 2024 election that this mass deportation campaign would ever come to their literal backyards. I mean, we actually had a source of Catherine's on the other day who described there being federal agents who jumped a fence onto his property, aggressively attacked men there, trying to yank a man out of a second-story window. I mean, this is now coming to Americans who've never seen this kind of thing. I spent a lot of time at one point in my career in South Texas, and there would be people who lived on the border saying they saw this stuff all the time. But now this is in parts of the country that are not familiar with this. Is there a chance that, similar to the way we saw in 2017 and 2018, photography, images, experiences like this, they change people? Do you think we may be at a point like that?
I do think we're at a point like that. I think the decision from Judge Ellis, although it was overturned by the circuit court, I think that gives us hope. We need to put pressure on ICE, on CBP, on this administration and the way that they're treating people, because it's only going to come from our pressure. It's going to come from our, votes. It's going to come from insisting on posting what's going on and posting that for the public to see, that this isn't just going to be Chicago or LA or Phoenix. This is going to come to every city if we don't put a stop to it.
Veronica, thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your insight.